Stories of an aircraft builder. Most of my stories have something in common. They run alongside each other, so when I tell them one after the other in these stories of an aircraft builder, we start to jump around a bit. We jump back and forth in time, so to speak. In today's story, I would like to tell you about the second reproduction of the Fokker Dr.I. I would like to give you the context by reading out what has been written about it on my first website for now more than 25 years. In other words, it was written at the time and not something that I am reporting today from my current memory in retrospect. At the end I will read out the article that was published about this episode back then in the magazine FLUGZEUG under the title "The Fokkers are coming." Unfortunately, the loss of 2 hard disks deprived me of the associated pictures, so what I can show you here as image material are only photos that I reduced the quality of on my website at the time in order to save server space. So I apologize for the poor quality of these few photographs. I have already explained how the Fokker Team Schorndorf came about in an earlier episode, so if you read about the Fokker Team Schorndorf or us in this write-up, you can safely replace it with my name. The second reproduction of the Fokker Dr.I by Michael Vogel, Blacksmith Shop Andreas Riedel and Fokker Team Schorndorf. The prehistory. The fact that the Fokker Team Schorndorf was involved in this replica of a Fokker triplane was more or less a whim of fate than a planned affair. The project was started by a young man from Stuttgart. His name is Michael Vogel. At the beginning of 1995, I received a phone call from him one evening. He had probably read an article about the Fokker Dr.I being built by the Fokker Team Schorndorf in the previous issue of Scale. By the way, we've discussed that in issue number 3 and 5 of this series. This article prompted him to contact us and ask for the relevant drawings, as he wanted to build a replica himself. On February 17th, 1995, he eventually acquired the set of drawings and began to work on them. In the time that followed, he visited us often and asked for advice when problems arose. A friendly relationship developed. It took about 2 years and the construction of the triplane proceeded slowly. Time and space problems slowed Michael Vogel down. For certain reasons, he sold the first fuselage and had to start again with another one. At various meetings between us and Michael, the space problem came up several times. Well, we solved it in a simple way. Andreas Riedel, Blacksmith's shop in Schorndorf, helped us with this. At that time, my father, Karl-Heinz Engels, moved into new business premises in an old factory complex with one of his stores for small electronic components. As is customary, he naturally introduced himself to his neighbors. One of these neighbors was Andreas Riedel with his blacksmith shop. When he heard the name Engels, he asked if it was the Fokker Team Schorndorf, and my father replied, "Yes, that's my son." A short time later I was standing in the workshop office having a lively conversation about the replica triplane. Andreas Riedel hinted several times that he had been thinking about building an airplane for a long time. Naturally, Michael Vogel's problems came to mind. In the days that followed, I brought us together, and so everyone had what he wanted. Michael could use the Kunstschmiede workshop after work and at the weekend. Andreas built the airplane and the Fokker Team Schorndorf was also there again. The whole thing was arranged verbally as a partnership. Andreas provided the workshop, his invaluable know-how as a master craftsman, and procured the materials. Michael built and paid the costs for the certification, and I contributed my manpower and the know-how acquired during the first reproduction. The reproduction was to be flown by Michael, as he was the only one with a pilot's license at the time. Michael Vogel and Andreas Riedel shared the ownership rights to this aircraft, while I claimed the right to build a Fokker D6 for myself in parallel with the construction of the triplane. A short time later, we brought the fuselage of the aircraft, whose tubular steel frame had already been built by Michael, from Stuttgart-Vaihingen to the workshop in Schondorf. This meant that the joint work on this second reproduction, in which the Fokker team Schondorf was significantly involved, could begin. The only, and as it turned out later the biggest problem, remained the procurement of the engine. It was to be a 9-cylinder rotary engine, of course. It was not so much the procurement as the team spirit damaging results of this that finally broke up the trio, but we will come back to that later. Second, construction continues. One of the first jobs was to correct the fuselage. Michael had inadvertently made the 4 front fuselage longerons from the cockpit on forwards out of tubes that were too thin. These first had to be removed and replaced with new ones of the correct thickness. There was still a lot to do on the fuselage itself. Many small parts had to be made and fitted. The workshop facilities and the immense expertise of Andreas Riedel were incredibly helpful this time. For many parts we had the opportunity now to make tools for the first time, which greatly simplified the manufacture of the individual parts. The work progressed well, and the teamwork was easy and fruitful. This went on for about a year, during which we worked very productively. Our working day in the workshop usually started at around 8 p.m. and sometimes went on until midnight or even longer. 3. The engine problem. Solved? At some point the tiresome topic of engine procurement came up again. Michael in particular, who wanted to fly the triplane at all costs, pushed for a solution. Optimistic as I am by nature, I never doubted that we would succeed in procuring an engine. When Michael once again urged us to clarify the question how and where from, I told him about Udo Jürges. I had known him personally for some time and knew that he had old engines and was also excellent at rebuilding new ones. However, I didn't particularly like him, as he was an ace professionally, but not my cup of tea as a person, so I avoided contact with him. But as my dispute didn't have to be with Michael, I told him about Udo and suggested that he should get in touch with him directly. I also mentioned that he should tell him how much the Fokker team Schondorf was involved in the construction of the triplane, as he felt the same way about me as I did about him. It didn't take long for Michael to inform me, glowing with joy, that he had managed to persuade Udo Jürges to provide us with an engine for the triplane, and not only that, Udo even wanted to build wheels for us and teardrop-shaped steel tubing for the undercarriage. 4. The breaking up. Completely flabbergasted, I then asked Michael if Udo knew that I was also busy building the airplane. Yes, of course he knew. Well, if that was the case, then everything was clear for me. I soon realized that things would turn out differently. The Fokker team Schondorf also maintains close relations with Leonard Opdyke, the editor of the American magazine World War I Aero. After consultation with Michael and Andreas, I sent this magazine some photographs of the triplane and an explanatory text. Unfortunately, something went terribly wrong with the publication, and it only mentioned Achim Engel's new triplane reproduction. I was able to explain the mistake to Andreas and Michael, but it made more waves than expected. One evening, Michael came into the workshop and behaved in a dismissive and hostile manner towards me. When I asked him why, I was told that Udo Jürges had read the article and had withdrawn his support with immediate effect. The engine problem was back on the agenda. It also turned out that Michael had obviously not mentioned that I or the Fokker team Schondorf was involved in the matter. Udo Jürges, as I learned through other channels, therefore assumed that I had put Michael in front as the bad guy in order to get an engine. We continued to work on the airplane, and one fine day Michael arrived with the remark that he had settled the matter with Udo Jürges and that the engine would come after all. Great! Everyone was delighted. The only strange thing was that Michael had been cutting me off ever since. Again, through other sources I learned that he had probably informed Udo Jürges that I was no longer involved in the project. Of course, I don't know whether this third-hand information was correct or not. In any case, everything fell into place. As I was about to take my final examination for my vocational training as a railway man at the time, I had a good excuse for suddenly having no more time to put into the project. I took the parts I had made for the D6 and went my own way. This meant that the Fokker team Schorndorf left the Vogel, Riedel, Engels triumvirate one experience richer. I have no information about the extent of which Michael Vogel and Andreas Riedel are still working together or not, nor do I know anything about the current status of the work on the aircraft. I personally enjoyed working in this team very much, especially as a good friendship developed up to a certain point. I certainly regret the break. It is a true pity that this happened. I think our team would have been able to come up with some very interesting projects, but that way I were carried on alone and, well, you know the story. And then, of course, we tried to advertise our work a little bit and have published articles, of which one I would like to read to you now. The article was published in May 1997 in the German magazine FLUGZEUG, which is a publication of the German Association of the Protection and Preservance of Historic Aircraft. I wrote that article in order to try and find someone who could come up with an engine at that time. And here it is. The Fokkers are coming. Faithful reproduction of a Fokker triplane of the type DR1 and a Fokker biplane of the type D6 by the Fokker team Schorndorf. In 1995, club member Michael Vogel began to build a faithful replica of the Fokker DR1 triplane based on the results of historical research by the Fokker team Schorndorf. After it turned out that he alone did not have the means to complete the project, I tried to realize the project together with the metalworking company Andreas Riedel Kunstschmiede, located in Schorndorf. After brief joint deliberations, it was decided that we, Andreas Riedel, Michael Vogel, and myself, Achim Engels, would complete the Fokker DR1 project in Andreas Riedel's workshop. At the same time, work also began on a faithful reproduction of the Fokker D6. For both replicas, the materials and processing methods used at the time were applied. The historical knowledge about the construction of Fokker airplanes which the Fokker team Schorndorf has gathered, combined with the high know-how and craftsmanship of the master craftsman Andreas Riedels, promise an absolutely worth-seeing result of historical accuracy and technically competent construction. This cooperation has created a team that will certainly carry out several more projects together in the future. The current status of the project is illustrated by the adjacent photographs. The pictures show the tubular steel fuselage of the triplane and its tail unit. Most of the components correspond to those of the Fokker D6 also. The majority of the individual parts for this aircraft have also already been prepared. Both aircraft are to be certified in the restricted special class as so-called experimentals here in Germany, and will also be flown at air shows organized by the German Society for the Preservation of Historic Aircraft. The triplane has already passed its first assessment by the Luftfahrtbundesamt, German Civil Aviation Authority, while this is still pending for the biplane. The biggest problem, however, is still the procurement of the two necessary engines, or at least a running 9-cylinder rotary engine with 110 horsepower. At this point, an appeal is made to the members of the society and the readers of FLUGZEUG. It is possible that such an engine can be found in this way, either on loan, for flight demonstrations, for purchase or for restoration, perhaps even in exchange for services from the Fokker team Schorndorf, or Andreas Riedel's master workshop. Anyone who knows where such an engine can be obtained is asked to contact the Fokker team Schondorf via the editorial office. It would be very unfortunate if both airplanes did not come off the ground simply because no original engine could be found.